The unemployment rate hits a 17-month high as people flood the jobs market. The US asks Australia for help in the Middle East, and a massive recall on Teslas after US authorities raised fears about the vehicle's autopilot system. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Friday, the 15th of December, 2023. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Michael.
Adam, after the show, stick around for Sean Aylmer's chat with Yvonne Quinn, who is the head of business marketing for Europe and Australia for Reddit. I don't know whether you're a Reddit user.
An occasional user, Michael.
Oh, really? Are you? Because the thing about Reddit is that it's so much bigger than you kind of think. We hear so much about Instagram and we hear about Facebook and we hear a lot about X, formerly Twitter. But Reddit still has something like 70 million unique active users every day. And those users are really, really active. And so it's a really interesting conversation about this massive social media platform that has been around for so long and the way businesses are using it to reach customers. So it's a good conversation for businesses to have a listen to. It's coming up after the show. The main story this morning, though, Adam, is a meaty one for us to sink our teeth into. The unemployment rate in Australia has hit a 17-month high, even as the number of jobs in the economy soared last month.
That's right, Michael. It's not quite at its 50-year lows, but the unemployment rate came in at 3.9% and the October figure was revised up to 3.8%. There was also a 61,000 jump in jobs, including 57,000 full-time jobs.
How can that happen, Adam?
It is amazing. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics said there's been both high population growth and jobs growth in recent months, and that's enough to push both up. It's also pushed up the number of unemployed people, which is currently 81,000, and that's over the past year. The employment to population ratio hit a record high of 64.6% last month, while the participation rate hit a record 67.2%. The jobs market is cooling, but certainly there's still plenty of positions available, so it's a pretty good outcome.
And I suspect this is the question that you would know I'm going to ask. What does it mean? What does it mean for interest rates?
Not just you want to know, Michael. I think we all do. And there's plenty of information to put into the interest rate equation over the past 24 hours. The employment data is the last significant piece of economic information for 2023. And it shows the job market is just easing up a bit now, which is what the Reserve Bank has wanted. And it is what should happen, given we've had 14 interest rate rises. The next really important Australian Bureau of Statistics number is the December quarter inflation number. We'll get that in late January. The other important piece of the jigsaw puzzle over the past 24 hours was the US Federal Reserve's decision to indicate that rates in the world's biggest economy might fall next year. I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but the commentary was enough to get local investors wondering whether the same thing could happen here in Australia. In fact, AMP came out and said they expect the first cut in Australian interest rates in the middle of 2024. Certainly, the higher unemployment rate does nothing to add to the rate hike case. A bit of Christmas cheer ahead of the Christmas holidays, perhaps, Michael.
Oh, thanks, Adam. It feels like a personal gift from you to me. I know that you had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to us all.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Local markets, how did they perform yesterday?
Look, there was plenty of good news there as well. The S&P ASX200 jumped 1.7%. That's big, to 7,373 points. That's a 5-month high on the back of the employment data and signs the US Fed is thinking about cutting rates. The local interest rate cycle over the past few years has been about 6 months behind the US. So if the USA is thinking about cutting rates in the middle of 2024, maybe the Reserve Bank of Australia will start cutting in 12 months' time. All 11 sub-indices of the ASX200 ended higher, with the interest rate sensitive stocks, that's real estate and tech companies, doing well. Materials and telcos also outperformed. Plenty of strong performers were led by James Hardie, WiseTech Global, Goodman, Macquarie Group and Santos. They all ended more than 3% higher.
And what's happening in international markets, Adam?
Michael, I mentioned this in the main story, and the really big news here is the US Federal Reserve has indicated that it could start cutting interest rates next year, and that really helped Wall Street. A meeting of the central bank board kept the official rate steady and gave a clear signal that the cycle of lifting rates is over. For the first time since March 2021, policymakers did not pencil in further interest rate rises. So while Jerome Powell said officials are prepared to hike again if price pressures return, he indicated policymakers are now turning their focus focus to when to cut rates as inflation continues its descent toward their 2% goal. Quarterly projections showed federal officials expect to lower rates by 75 basis points next year, a sharper pace of cuts than indicated in December, and that sent bond yields lower and equities higher. Anything that happens to US interest rates or perceptions of future rates affects markets, and the Australian dollar rallied nearly 2% on the news to be trading at just under 67 US cents. Bitcoin also jumped to shift towards US $43,000 a unit.
All right, there is plenty happening. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Adam, the United States has asked Australia to send a warship to the Red Sea amid ongoing tensions in the Middle East, where fighting between Israel and Hamas shows no sign of letting up.
Yeah, Michael, the request came from the US Navy, which wants the vessel to join an international task force following an increase in attacks on ships by Iran-backed militia trying to disrupt supplies. Treasurer Jim Chalmers said the Australian government already contributed to maritime security in that often dangerous part of the world. He said the usual practice is for the Defence Minister to consider it and make a recommendation. The US has begun speaking to at least 12 allies and partners about the peacekeeping mission, bolstering the American presence in the region amid concerns of a wider regional war. And staying with the US Senate has passed AUKUS legislation that will permit the sale of nuclear-powered submarines to Australia and relax export controls for certain defence capabilities.
Woolworths has finally got the okay from the competition regulator to buy Petstock a year after it made its initial bid. Petstock's the second biggest player in the sector behind TPG Capital's Green Cross, and much of the delay came after the ACCC evaluated historic acquisitions made by Petstock that had not actually been on its radar.
That's right, Michael. And yesterday, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission said that it will not oppose Woolworths' acquisition and has accepted a court enforceable undertaking from Woolworths to support Petstock's divestitures. ACCC Chairwoman Gina Cass-Gottlieb said that while the asset sales resolve the regulator's concern in this transaction, dealing with competition issues in a historical way is not efficient or effective in keeping competition intact.
Adam, for a business podcast, anything James Packer does is of interest, isn't it? And especially when it's a move like this one. Mr. Packer has built an $80 million stake in Paramount Global, which is the American media and entertainment conglomerate that owns Network 10, signalling a broadening of the billionaire's media interests.
Yeah, Michael, this did pique a lot of people's interest. Mr. Packer has returned to the world of media earlier this year after several years' absence when he emerged as a key multi-million-dollar investor in embattled broadcaster Alan Jones' Australian Digital Holdings. He has previously been the owner of 10. In 2010, he bought an 18% stake of that network for $244 million, later selling half of that to Lachlan Murdoch. The network was then placed into administration in 2017 and bought by US studio CBS, which would subsequently shift into Paramount after a merger.
Adam, a flood of company failures and a spike in bad loans are on the horizon. Not great news, according to market watchers, as consumer and business sentiment deteriorate. Now, Creditor Watch has warned a large increase in business failures is likely next year as a string of interest rate rises, sticky inflation, and a pullback in consumer spending take their toll.
That's right, Michael, and that's according to a report in The Australian. The credit bureau Creditor Watch said many businesses trading at a loss would not survive the coming 6 to 9 months of high interest rates and low consumer confidence. Ratings agency Fitch has warned that lending markets are deteriorating, with arrears exceeding pre-COVID levels. National Australia Bank is also charting a worsening of trade conditions, with its latest business confidence survey revealing another quarter of weakening growth. Creditor Watch said its business risk index was indicating the insolvency rate would increase from 4.18% up to 5.8% by the middle of 2024, and that's above pre-pandemic levels. Defaults on business-to-business trade payments have increased 57% since January.
Adam, we are positively spoilt for state news today. There are stories all over the place. Victorian Energy Minister Lily D'Ambrosio has joined Treasurer Tim Pallas in hitting out at the federal government, allocating just 1% of its $11 billion priority infrastructure spending to projects in the state.
Yes, it does sound a bit paltry, and the Victorians aren't happy. Also, yesterday, New South Wales Energy Minister Penny Sharp called on households and businesses to cut electricity use as searing heat stretches the state's power grid close to breaking point. Reserves of electricity generation were forecast to be less than required yesterday afternoon and into the evening as people switched on air conditioners to cope with temperatures set to reach 40 degrees in Sydney and other parts of the state. And Western Australia may need to rely on natural gas drawn from storage and LNG cargoes diverted from the export market to avert shortages in the domestic market over the next 3 years, the Australian Energy Market Operator has advised.
Okay, turning to international news now, and Republicans in the US House have to formally authorize an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden, escalating a probe that's been underway for several months now.
The 221 to 212 party line vote sets up a high-profile clash between Congress and the White House as the 2024 election approaches. Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump has urged Republican lawmakers to step up the impeachment inquiry against Biden. And according to Bloomberg, the investigation is focused on Biden family finances and business dealings of the president's son Hunter and other relatives. The resolution establishes the investigation's procedures and powers, but doesn't set a deadline or lay out any specific impeachable offences. The White House and many congressional Democrats say the inquiry is merely an effort to distract attention from Trump's criminal trials.
How about this one, Adam? Tesla will recall and fix more than 2 million vehicles. That's its biggest recall ever after the top US auto safety regulator determined that its driver assistance system, Autopilot, doesn't do enough to guard against misuse.
Michael, the scale of this, 2 million vehicles, is quite something, and it is the result of a years-long defect investigation that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration will keep open to monitor the efficacy of Tesla's fixes. An NHTSA spokesman said the probe found that Tesla's means for keeping drivers engaged were inadequate. It said that automated technology holds great promise for improving safety, but only when deployed responsibly. The recall is the second this year involving Tesla's automated driving systems, which have come under escalating scrutiny after hundreds of crashes, some of which unfortunately resulted in fatalities.
Now, this last story, Adam, is certainly one for those of us who watch the media closely, but also just for those of us who watch TV closely as well. Netflix has for the first time released comprehensive data on what people are watching in the first of a regular report promised by the streaming giant.
That's right, Michael. And Ted Sarandos, the founder and CEO of Netflix, has advised this is the same data that they use to run the business. So it's particularly interesting. The political thriller The Night Agent was the most watched title globally in the first half of 2023, generating 812.1 million hours of viewing. And that's according to a report on Bloomberg. That was followed by season 2 of the family drama Ginny and Georgia, and the debut of South Korean series The Glory. Ginny and Georgia delivered the biggest audience if you consider all seasons of a show, and the disclosure by Netflix is the most detailed ever for any streaming service, follows a months-long fight between the Hollywood labour unions and major studios. In the wake of 2 strikes, writers and actors won more compensation for their work in streaming, and their pay hinges in part on greater disclosure of US viewer data by services like Netflix.
Adam, I'm a little ashamed to admit this because I like to think of myself as the young, probably hip member of the Fear and Greed team.
That's a relative claim, Michael.
Yeah, it is, but still the one who's a little bit in touch with kind of popular culture. I have not seen The Night Agent. I have not seen Ginny and Georgia, and I have not seen The Glory. None of those titles that you've mentioned there.
But wouldn't you think political thriller, The Night Agent, doesn't that kind of whet your appetite?
It does, but honestly, Netflix on ours defaults to a Netflix kids account. So we've actually kind of set in place, those restrictions where you can't actually watch anything on there that is above PG rated.
Have you locked yourself out?
I have. All of these are new to me because we have banned ourselves from watching them because of the risk that the kids are going to get on there and watch them on their own. But anyway, that's my excuse for not being in touch with popular culture.
You got plenty of research to come, Michael.
Yes. Now, Adam, great interview coming up. This is, I suppose, a little bit more popular culture, really, isn't it? And because social media, I know you're big online. Yvonne Quinn is the guest today in the Fear and Greed Daily interview from Reddit. This is just a really interesting insight into really one of the original social media platforms. I think from memory, Reddit's been around since about 2005. So it certainly kind of around the same time as Facebook. It certainly predates Instagram, well and truly older than TikTok. And it has just established itself as a place where people go online and they discuss things. It's all built around communities, and businesses now are starting, or have been for some time, making the most of the platform. And it's just a really interesting insight from someone who is kind of running the business operations as far as marketing goes across Europe and Australia, Yvonne Quinn. So it's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Friday, the 15th of December, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast, and please join us as well online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.